Hey everyone, my name's Johnny, and I am a professor of information literacy at the University of Tennessee Martin. And I wanted to talk to you today about the role of the media in Israel's war on Palestine. Now, I should note that I gave this presentation as part of a panel about a month ago, so a few of the examples are going to be mildly dated, but the general idea is still there. So when I generally talk about media literacy, I talk about five different ways that the media kind of shapes stories and how they shape how we see the world. That's narrative and framing, labeling, siloing events, omission, and shooting the messenger. And for this example, I also wanted to add muddying the waters because that's one of the biggest things that both Israel and Western media have been doing. So we're going to start with narrative and framing, and we as humans, when we want to convey something, we don't just like give each other raw data. We tell stories. That's how we convey information. So how we tell those stories is going to shape how the reader or the listener is going to understand those events. How we describe something matters. So take a look at the way that this has been written up in a lot of the media outlets. And the New York Times is still doing this. I'd have to check on the others, but referring to it as a war between Israel and Hamas. Well, that's misleading, for a number of reasons, especially since, but it's not just Hamas. While they are the largest group in Palestine, they're not the only one. There's the PLO, there's Fatah, there's PFLP, DFLP, the People's Party, the Communist Party, Lion's Den, Islamic Jihad, which just means struggle for the record. So just that framing matters because we've been told for years that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and so saying that Israel is going to war against a terrorist organization makes it, or is at least intended to make it more palatable. But Hamas has no real power in the West Bank. Even though attacks in the West Bank have escalated rapidly, and this 175 deaths was from over a month ago. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know it's significantly more than that, plus all of the people who've been arrested. And another way that the media frames things is when they choose what words to translate and which ones not to, and how they choose to translate those words. So, when we hear martyr, we're expected to believe that only the active combatants are what are referred to as martyrs, and so saying glory to the martyrs is glory only to the active combatants, which however you feel about them is irrelevant here, because it's not just them. It's everyone that has been killed in this conflict, and everyone who has been killed, by Israel since its founding. In Shahid does translate to martyr, but it also translates to witness, and it's commonly used for anyone who has fallen under conflict. Similarly, there's the word jihad, which just translates to struggle. We're taught to think that jihad means like this violent, death to America, death to all Jews, all of these kind of things. But it doesn't. It just means struggle. Giving birth can mean struggle. So it's not just it's not holy war. It's human struggle. And then lastly, there's intifada, which means uprising or shaking off. And again, this word has been demonized for decades. when it really just means, fighting back, pushing back. So, these, but the way that they do this definitely shapes how we see these things. When we see calls for an intifada, there's this initial gut reaction like, oh no, that's scary. No, it's not. It just means an uprising. So, that's another way that narrative and framing shape things. And then there's the passive tense. You'll recognize this from like whenever the cops shoot someone in the U.S. It's person shot in officer involved shooting, or like anything like that. And the BBC one on the left is probably the most perfect example, because in the same tweet, 500 people in Gaza have died, more than 700 people in Israel have been killed. It's, so one is passive, one is active. Similarly, children Israelis have children, Palestinians have young people. Why differentiate? If you're not just trying to avoid saying that, that Israel is holding children in prison, which they absolutely are. And this passive voice, especially the killed and died one, is what's known as the exonerative tense. Because it distances the act from the actor. So officer involved shooting. Yeah, they were involved because they did the shooting. So it's the same kind of deal. So you can think about what you recognize domestically and how that's happening internationally. Here, there's an explosion that caused heavy damage. How did that explosion occur? Who knows? Who's to say? Similar, if that was done here in the U.S., this is basically how it would be framed. Explosion happens, Twin Towers damaged, everyone should forget about this, and Al-Qaeda says that there were infidels in the buildings, so it's justified. That's Israel targeting Palestine, specifically Gaza, in the same manner. And then there's labeling, which could easily be kind of an offshoot of narrative and framing, but I think it kind of merits its own category. So, Hamas has been labeled as a terrorist organization by the U.S., and so we are supposed to instinctively, just view them as being evil and, bloodthirsty. And that begs the question, who is a terrorist and who is a freedom fighter? Who is a prisoner, political prisoner or otherwise, and who is a hostage? So I'm old, I'm pushing 50, and when I was growing up in the 80s, Nelson Mandela was labeled a terrorist by the United States, and Osama bin Laden, as part of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, was labeled a freedom fighter. And so, the thing about labels is that they tell you more about the labeler than the labeled. A terrorist is anyone who takes up arms in opposition to a U.S. ally, and a freedom fighter is anyone who takes up arms against a geopolitical foe of the United States. That's really the easiest way to keep track of them. On October 7th, Hamas and other Palestinian militants captured 240 Israelis, and they have been consistently labeled hostages. Whereas Palestinians have been arrested and jailed, crazy numbers, and it's only skyrocketed since October 7th. And really, for every prisoner that that Israel has released, they've managed to capture at least one, if not more, to replace them. And these include children as young as 12. So what a lot of these people have not actually been charged with anything. They're just on like what is it? Uh, I forget what it's called, but basically they can hold you without charges for 6 months, and then after that 6 months they can choose to do it again for another 6 months. So administrative detention is the term. So what's the difference between people who've been captured and held for a year with no charges and the people who were captured on October 7th? And that's the thing. Like Palestinians refer to whereas Israelis refer to people as prisoners, but the Palestinians refer to them essentially as hostages. And so they, one of their demands, one of their big ones is, a hostage exchange. And another thing about labeling is the dehumanizing language. There's the children of darkness from Netanyahu, and human animals. Civilians are legitimate targets, but really that children of light and children of darkness one from Netanyahu, if it rings familiar, it's because that is literal Nazi language. Like he's actually almost quoting, at least paraphrasing, the Nazis. Then there's siloing events. So what I mean by this is that events occur essentially in a vacuum. Like there's no events that lead up to something that have led to it. It's just, yep, this thing just happened out of the blue. Things like that just happen all the time. So you don't talk about going back and one of the leaders and founders of Zionism, Theodore Herzl, reaching out to Cecil Rhodes, saying that they wanted to colonize Asia Minor, but Palestine, and specifically calling it something colonial, which is why they reached out to Rhodes, the British arch-imperialist, arch-colonialist. And to give you an idea of who he was, I put the quote down below, because of course the Anglo-Saxon race, being the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses. Sure, dude. But so this is what it started on. It was built on colonialism and racism, things that get left out of the current discussion. And then you get these calls like, well, the Palestinians should just protest peacefully. Well, they did that, 5 years ago in the Great March of Return, and Israel met them with snipers. They killed 266 people, wounded over 30,000. They would shoot them in the leg. That's where you see the lower extremities. Like over 7,000 people shot in the leg to keep them from protesting peacefully. And they also killed a couple journalists and wounded hundreds more, which is a thing that they do regularly. Another thing that's not mentioned is, Israeli settlers invading Al-Aqsa Mosque. This happened. If you can see the date at the bottom, it says October 4th. So this was obviously before October 7th that that the Israelis were essentially desecrating a holy site. But that's not brought up. We're taught to believe that it only started on October 7th. So early on, 2 days after October 7th, the New York Times editorial board puts out this call for unity with Israel. What don't they talk about in this? Well, they don't talk about the fact that even center-right groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, which typically give cover for Western imperialism, label Israel as an apartheid state. They also don't mention that the United States, the United Nations, has declared that all people facing occupation have the right of self-determination and the right of resistance by any means necessary, including armed resistance. So, it is both a legal right of the Palestinians to fight back, and what they are fighting against is a well-known apartheid state. These things are never put in there, though. CNN puts out this article from a hostage saying, "I went through hell," and leaving out all the other things that she said. For instance, that they treated us well. They got doctor visits. There was a paramedic. That they ate the same food as the Palestinians did, and that they were told that they wouldn't be hurt. But all of that is conveniently left out of the CNN article. They just went with the clickbait headline. And there's also something that's not reported, and that's that Israel is likely culpable of many of the civilian deaths on October 7th, during the fighting. And more evidence has come out since I've even put out this, since I first did this presentation. But there's a lot of evidence that, that they were basically firing indiscriminately into any building that might hold a member of Hamas, regardless of whether there were Israelis inside. That, which aligns with the Hannibal Directive that Israel has used in the past, which is basically they have the green light to kill their own people to avoid them being taken hostage. One of the generals actually ordered an aerial strike against his own base, knowing that there were still occupation soldiers outside. And then, there's this the March for Israel, and there's a lot of these are the pictures that were in like the Washington Post. You see the Israeli flag, and some other we stand with Israel kind of things. But what you don't see are the other signs calling for just unlimited death. That civilians are Hamas in training. Basically just kill them all. These kind of signs were left out of the Washington Post coverage, even though they provide a lot of important context. And then there's shooting the messenger. And in Israel's case, Jesus, it's so literal. Let's start with the idea, the metaphorical idea of shooting the messenger. Biden saying he has no confidence in the Palestinian death count, that they won't validate the Gaza Health Ministry death toll, and this was when it was at 10,000, not 20,000. So trying to downplay the legitimacy of the Gaza Health Ministry's data, even though the U.S. and other international bodies have been using that data for years. But then, then there's the real shooting the messenger, and I think we're over 80 journalists that they've killed now. This was over a month ago. And it's targeted. They're doing it intentionally because they don't want the rest of the world to see what they're doing. So there were reports of Hamas killing babies and beheading them, and Biden saying that he saw video. He did not, because no video of it exists, because it didn't happen. The White House had to walk it back, but you can't you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, once it's out there, man, there's people that still believe that happened. And, that's, I don't think it was an accident. And, but when you want to talk about it, you can talk about the 37 babies that were left in their incubator to die by Israel. They wouldn't let doctors or nurses or parents or anything take the babies with them when they forced them out. So, I mean, if you want to talk about dead babies, you got to talk about what Israel has been doing. And then there is the attack on the one big attack on a hospital that the IDF really wanted everyone to believe that Palestine caused, saying that they fired a rocket and it went off poorly and that's what blew up the hospital. Israel put out a tweet, saying, here's the evidence, with the video, and then they had to take the video down because the video's timestamp was an hour later than the bomb went off, and so you see that they had to edit it and take it out. The New York Post went so far as to call, saying that Israel did this blood libel. But this is all, despite the fact that Israel had actually bombed that same hospital previously, had told them that they were going to bomb them. There's no evidence that points counter to Israel doing it. But they really wanted us to believe that, despite the fact that they've blown up I don't know how many hospitals since then. And in that attacking medical workers and hospitals is common for Israel. In 2014 they bombed the hospital. 2 years ago they attacked the healthcare system. Intentionally targeting health workers. In the West Bank, medics were given bulletproof vests. It's just all over the place. Israel even used white phosphorus on a children's hospital. And for anybody that doesn't know, white phosphorus does not stop burning until it hits bone. So that leaves us with the question of why. Why are they so intent on having us believe things that aren't true?
We're also going to discuss the ironclad commitment, and I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values. And I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
And there you have it, straight from the horse's ass. Israel is a function of U.S. imperialism. And here's the thing that they really don't want you to know about. It does get some press, but it's not nearly as common. The stock prices of military contractors have just skyrocketed, and that a lot of politicians own stock in those same companies. So essentially, when they vote to give, quote, aid to Israel, what's happening is they're transferring our taxpayer dollars to weapons manufacturers to send weapons over to Israel to kill Palestinians. And they're basically giving themselves a raise as they do it. They're paying themselves as they commit genocide. And I wanted to note that, I highly recommend Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. especially talking about the interlocking boards of directorates. But here's just one example. So, the people that own the three of the top owners of Lockheed Martin are the financial institutions State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock. They have about 70% of the total shares of Lockheed Martin. And those same three also own, about 2/3 of the shares of Disney. So, when you see ABC News, ABC News is owned by the same people that own Lockheed Martin. So they have a vested interest in perpetuating war. They are literally war profiteers, and most Western media, at least the for-profit kind, is essentially just a spokesperson for U.S. imperialism. So, that's kind of why it happens. So now that you see some of the techniques that they use, I hope you can be better prepared to see through the lies and, to resist and to be able to share this with others, so that we can all get a better understanding of what's actually happening and not what we're being told. So thank you very much, and stay strong out there.